In the summer of 2017, a hydrological survey team working along a remote stretch of the Colorado River in northern Arizona noticed something that shouldn't have been there. They were mapping subsurface water movement through a canyon wall that had partially collapsed after a season of unusually heavy flooding. And through the broken rock face, partially submerged and sealed behind 2 feet of compacted sediment, was an opening, not a natural crack or a fault line. An opening with deliberately smoothed edges, partially reinforced with fitted stone, hidden behind a false wall of loose rubble that the floodwater had finally torn free. The team was not archaeologists. They were engineers. But every one of them understood immediately that what they were looking at was not supposed to exist. They documented the entrance, reported it to the state, and stepped back. What came next took 18 months of negotiations, permits, and multi-agency coordination before the first trained researchers could enter. What those researchers found inside a chamber roughly 40 feet deep and 20 feet wide, carved partially by nature and partially by human hands, was 20 objects that no conventional model of pre-Columbian American history can fully explain. Some of what you're about to hear has been published in academic papers that received almost no mainstream coverage. Some of it is currently the subject of active, ongoing analysis. And some of it has been quietly set aside by institutions that don't yet know what to do with it. If this is your first time on this channel, subscribe right now, because every single one of these 20 objects rewrites something. And number 1 is the reason the lead archaeologist on this project requested a 6-month leave of absence the week after the final analysis came back. Number 20 was a length of knotted cord, but calling it a length of cord, the way you'd describe something you found in a drawer, understates what it actually is. The cord was made from 3 twisted plant fibers, each strand dyed a different color, one reddish-brown, one pale yellow, and one a deep blue-gray that analysis later identified as coming from a pigment derived from a plant species native to the Pacific coast of Mexico. The knots along its length were not random. Researchers familiar with quipu, the knotted recording system used by Andean civilizations, recognized the structure immediately, though the specific knot types and spacing differed in ways that don't match any documented Andean example precisely. Quipu have been found as far north as coastal Peru and as far south as Chile, but nothing resembling the recording logic of this system has ever been found in the American Southwest, let alone in a sealed underground chamber beside the Colorado River. Whatever information this cord was meant to carry, it was made by someone who understood that knots could hold knowledge, and whoever sealed it in this cave considered that knowledge worth preserving. Number 19 was a ceramic vessel, intact and sealed, smaller than a fist, made from a fine-grained clay that doesn't match any local Arizona soil profile, but does match sources in the Four Corners region of southern Utah. The stopper was a fitted piece of the same clay, sealed with a resinous material that the conservators had to work carefully to remove without damaging the vessel. Inside was a dark, oily substance that has been partially analyzed. It contains several components, including beeswax, plant-based resins, and at least one organic compound that the analytical chemists described in their preliminary report as consistent with a concentrated alkaloid preparation of unknown botanical origin. The vessel's exterior was decorated with a series of concentric stepped lines, a design motif that appears repeatedly in the ceramic traditions of the ancestral Puebloan culture, which flourished across the Colorado Plateau for centuries before and after 1000 CE. Someone made this with intention and skill, filled it with something they considered worth sealing and preserving, and placed it in the dark beneath a river. The question of what that substance was for and for whom it was being kept has not been answered. Number 18 was a carved antler, roughly 14 inches long, from what bone specialists identified as a bull elk. The carving covered the entire surface in a continuous design, wrapping around the antler from base to tip without interruption. The design showed a procession of small human figures, each slightly different from the last, alternating with animal forms that researchers identified as including a serpent, a bird with an elaborate tail, and a figure that most of the team agreed most closely resembled a jaguar. Jaguars are not native to Arizona. They have been documented as far north as the borderlands of southern Arizona and New Mexico in historical times. But their presence in indigenous iconography of the Southwest is rare, and, when it appears, typically understood as evidence of long-distance cultural exchange with Mesoamerican traditions, where the jaguar held deep religious significance. The procession on this antler has no beginning and no end. It circles back on itself. Someone spent a very long time making this, and they made it to tell a story that loops. Number 17 was a stone disc, about 7 inches in diameter, polished smooth on both faces and incised around its edge with a series of evenly spaced marks. The marks number 365, not approximately 365. Exactly. The disc is made from a dark green stone that analysis identified as serpentinite, a material whose nearest geological source to this site is roughly 400 miles south, in the mountains of Sonora, Mexico. A 365-mark disc could, of course, be coincidence, except that the marks are not evenly distributed. They are grouped with small gaps at intervals that correspond to the divisions between months in a solar calendar with 12 months, and those groups are further subdivided by even smaller marks in a way that one specialist in pre-Columbian astronomy described as consistent with a system for tracking the relationship between the solar and lunar calendars. Someone brought this stone 400 miles from Mexico and carved a calendar into it. Then they put it in a cave. Number 16 was a bundle of wooden sticks, 9 of them, each exactly the same length, each made from the same type of wood, a dense, close-grained wood that the dendrochronologists identified as coming from a species of oak, not native to Arizona, but common in the highlands of central Mexico. Each stick had been treated with a hardening resin that preserved them in remarkable condition. Each one was incised with a different arrangement of marks along its length. The marks are consistent across all 9 sticks in terms of their basic unit, a small diagonal cut. But the arrangements vary from stick to stick in a way that structural linguists who examined photographs of the objects recognized as having the characteristics of a notation system rather than decoration. This is not 9 decorated sticks. This is 9 pages of something. Whatever it says, the person who made it understood that written knowledge required a medium that could survive, and they chose well. Comment below right now and tell me what you think these sticks were recording, because the researchers have 4 competing theories and no consensus. Number 15 was a fragment of woven textile, about 10 inches by 12 inches, preserved in the dry, sealed air of the chamber, in a condition that made the conservators audibly exhale when they first unfolded it under laboratory lighting. The textile is made from 2 different fibers woven together, one of which has been identified as cotton, domesticated cotton, which was cultivated in the American Southwest beginning roughly 2,000 years ago. The other fiber has not been definitively identified, but its characteristics under microscopic analysis are consistent with a fiber derived from a plant in the agave family, processed in a specific way, documented in textile traditions from the west coast of Mexico. The design woven into the textile is geometric and precise, a repeating pattern of interlocked stepped diamonds in 3 colors, none of which have faded significantly despite the centuries. Whoever wove this knew what they were doing at a level of technical mastery that implies years of training within a tradition that combined materials and techniques from at least 2 distinct regional cultures. Number 14 was a human skull, and I want to describe it carefully because it was treated with the same care and respect by the research team as every other object in the chamber, and was subsequently repatriated to tribal representatives before comprehensive analysis could be completed. What the initial examination found was this. The skull showed evidence of a mortuary practice called cranial modification, specifically a deliberate reshaping of the skull during infancy through the sustained application of pressure, a practice documented in several pre-Columbian cultures including those of coastal Peru, parts of Mesoamerica, and, less commonly, some communities of the ancient Southwest. The skull was placed at the center of the chamber's back wall, elevated on a small natural shelf, oriented to face the cave entrance. Around it, in a careful arrangement on the shelf, were 11 small objects made from turquoise, each carved into a slightly different shape. It was not placed there carelessly. It was placed there as if it were watching over everything else. Number 13 was a copper axe head, about 4 inches long, cast rather than hammered, which means whoever made it had mastered smelting and casting technology for copper. That technology existed in Mesoamerica by around 800 CE and spread into the American Southwest gradually over subsequent centuries. But an object of this casting quality found in a sealed context this far west and this far from known Mesoamerican manufacturing centers is unusual. The axe head itself was never used as a tool. The edge shows no wear, no impact marks, no residue. It was made to look like an axe and to be kept as an axe, which means it was made as a symbol rather than an implement. Its handle socket still contains carbonized wood fragments from the handle it was once fitted to, and the wood has been radiocarbon dated to approximately 1050 CE, give or take 80 years, placing it squarely within the period when Chaco Canyon, 200 miles to the east, was at the height of its extraordinary cultural and architectural fluorescence. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you know that Chaco Canyon is one of the most sophisticated pre-Columbian complexes in North America, and almost everything about it is still contested. Subscribe right now if you haven't already, because what's coming in the next 7 objects changes the picture considerably. Number 12 was a flat piece of polished slate, roughly the size of a playing card but twice as thick, covered on one face with an incised design that the team's illustrators spent 2 full days documenting at 1:1 scale. The design was a human face in frontal view, rendered with a level of naturalistic precision that is unusual in pre-Columbian North American art, which more commonly works in symbolic or geometric modes. The face had specific individualized features, not a type, but a person, or at least the attempt to record a specific person's appearance. Around the face, incised in a border, were symbols that appeared to be the same notation system found on the 9 wooden sticks from Object 16. If that reading is correct, this slate is a labeled portrait, a named likeness of someone considered important enough to carve in stone and seal in a hidden chamber beneath a river. We don't know whose face it is. We don't know what the inscription says. But someone thought both were worth preserving forever. Number 11 was a shell trumpet, made from a large conch shell of a species native to the Gulf of California, about 200 miles to the southwest. Shell trumpets made from conch have a long history in pre-Columbian cultures, from the southwest through Mesoamerica and into South America, used in ceremonies, as signals, and as symbols of authority. This one had been modified for playing, with a mouthpiece carved at the tip and the interior partly cleared, and it had been played extensively, judging by the wear patterns at the mouthpiece. But what set it apart from the many other conch shell trumpets in the archaeological record was what had been done to its exterior. The entire outer surface had been incised with fine lines forming a continuous scene. A procession of figures moving toward a central image that researchers identified as a representation of a stepped pyramid. Not a mountain. Not an abstraction. A stepped pyramid, the form associated most strongly with Mesoamerican monumental architecture. Someone who had either seen such a structure or had heard it described in detail enough to render it accurately carved that image into the surface of a musical instrument and carried it here. Number 10 was a small clay tablet, roughly 3 inches square and half an inch thick, covered on both faces with incised text-like symbols arranged in horizontal rows. The symbols are not pictographic. They are abstract, standardized, and varied enough to suggest a syllabic or alphabetic system rather than a logographic one. They match nothing in the established catalog of pre-Columbian writing systems from North America. They do not match Mayan glyphs or Aztec pictography or the Indus Valley script or any other named writing system, though researchers have noted structural similarities to several undeciphered scripts, including the Rongorongo system from Easter Island, a comparison that one academic described as extraordinary and another described as irresponsible. What everyone agrees on is that this tablet is organized writing. Someone sat down with a prepared clay surface and a stylus and recorded something with deliberate, systematic care. The tablet was fired after the writing was completed, which means whoever made it intended it to last. They were right. Number 9 was a mirror, circular, about 4 inches in diameter, made from a single polished piece of pyrite, iron sulfide, which produces a highly reflective surface when worked to sufficient smoothness. Pyrite mirrors were objects of extraordinary prestige in Mesoamerican cultures, particularly among the Aztec and their predecessors, where they were associated with divination, with the god Tezcatlipoca, whose name translates roughly as smoking mirror, and with the ability to see things that are hidden or distant. This mirror is among the best preserved examples ever found north of Mexico. The pyrite has not tarnished significantly. The reflection it produces, even now, is clear enough to see your face in. The back of the mirror is plain except for a single incised spiral. Whoever placed this object in the cave either brought it from far to the south or had access to a craftsperson who knew the Mesoamerican tradition intimately. Either answer implies a network of connection and movement that the standard maps of pre-Columbian North America don't show. Number 8 was a set of 4 carved wooden figures, each about 6 inches tall, each depicting a standing human with arms at the sides and eyes closed. They were placed in the 4 corners of the chamber, one in each corner, equidistant from the walls, facing inward toward the center of the room. The wood has been identified as a species of cedar native to the Sierra Madre Occidental in northwestern Mexico, not to Arizona. Each figure is slightly different from the others in the details of its facial features and the pattern of lines incised across its body, but they are clearly the work of the same hand, the same set of tools, the same artistic tradition. Together they form a set, and their placement was not accidental. Someone designed the spatial arrangement of this chamber, decided where things would go and why, and understood this space as having 4 sides that needed to be anchored. This is ritual architecture at the level of intent, and it transforms the cave from a storage place into something else entirely. Number 7 was a turquoise mosaic, 3 inches wide and 5 inches long, consisting of hundreds of individually shaped and fitted pieces of turquoise mounted on a backing of hardened resin, attached to a thin sheet of what turned out to be hammered gold. Gold working in pre-Columbian North America is rare north of Mexico, documented at some sites in the southeast but essentially unrecorded in the southwest prior to this find. The turquoise itself matches chemical signatures from mines in the Cerrillos Hills of New Mexico, a source that was heavily exploited during the Chacoan period and whose turquoise was distributed across enormous distances through the Chacoan trade network. But the gold backing doesn't match anything local. Its isotopic signature, which can in principle identify the region of origin for gold deposits, matches most closely to sources in the Sierra Madre of Mexico. Someone combined New Mexico turquoise and Mexican gold in a single object of extraordinary technical and artistic sophistication and placed it here. Drop a comment right now and tell me how you think something like this ends up in a sealed cave in Arizona. Because the researchers have asked that question for 7 years, and nobody has given a satisfying answer. Number 6 was an astronomical instrument, or what the team's astronomer concluded was almost certainly an astronomical instrument. It was a flat rectangular piece of polished obsidian, about 8 inches long and 3 inches wide, with a narrow slit cut along its long axis. The slit is exactly 4 millimeters wide for its entire length, maintained with a precision that implies careful grinding and testing, and it is oriented along the instrument's long axis with an accuracy that the team's instrument maker confirmed would have required deliberate, repeated measurement to achieve. When held at arm's length and oriented toward the horizon, the slit functions as an accurate sighting tool for tracking the rising and setting positions of celestial objects across seasons. The obsidian itself is a variety not found in Arizona, but traceable to sources in the Trans-Pecos region of West Texas, roughly 500 miles to the east. Someone made a precision optical instrument from stone sourced 500 miles away and used it to watch the sky. Then they left it in a cave. Number 5 was a document of sorts, though calling it that makes it sound mundane. It was a piece of treated animal hide, roughly 14 inches by 10 inches, folded carefully into eighths and wrapped in a separate piece of plain hide that had been laced closed. When the conservators unfolded it under controlled conditions, they found its surface covered with a mixture of painted imagery and incised symbols. The imagery showed a map, unmistakably a map, with a river rendered as a winding line, canyon walls indicated by parallel marks, and a series of locations marked with symbols repeated from the small clay tablet of Object 10. At least 11 distinct locations were marked. 2 of them have been tentatively identified by comparing the map's proportions and features to known geography, as corresponding to places in the canyon system of the Colorado River and one of its major tributaries. 3 of the other marked locations do not correspond to any archaeological site currently known. Whether that means the sites haven't been found yet, or were never found, or represent something other than physical locations, nobody has committed to saying. Number 4 was a necklace, and I include it here not because a necklace is inherently mysterious, but because of what it was made from. The strand itself was a braided plant fiber cord. Unremarkable. Suspended from it were 11 pendants, each about an inch long, each carved from a different material. Turquoise from New Mexico, obsidian from West Texas, copper from, according to isotopic analysis, the upper Midwest, possibly Michigan. A pale green stone identified as jadeite, with a chemical signature matching jade deposits in Guatemala. A dark red bead of carnelian whose nearest natural source is in Baja California. A piece of worked abalone shell from the Pacific coast. A small cylinder of pipestone from Minnesota. 2 unidentified mineral specimens still under analysis, and 2 pendants of carved bone. The necklace is not decorative in the way we ordinarily use that word. It is a geographic catalog. It is a record of every place the person who wore it, or the network that assembled it, had reached. It is a map worn around the neck. Number 3 was a codex-style document, 3 panels of treated bark paper, each about 9 inches tall and 6 inches wide, folded accordion-style and housed between 2 thin wooden boards that had been lashed together with plant fiber cordage. The bark paper is a species identified as fig, which does not grow in Arizona but is native to subtropical regions, including much of Mexico, where bark paper preparation and use for screenfold documents was a well-developed tradition, particularly among the Aztec and their predecessors. The 2 outer panels of this codex are blank, deliberately left so. The inner panels are covered in painted imagery in 4 colors: red, black, yellow, and a blue-green that has remained vivid despite the centuries. The imagery shows a sequence of scenes, at least 14 distinct scenes across the 3 panels. The research team's iconographer spent 4 months working through the imagery and produced a preliminary reading that describes the document as a narrative, a story in pictures, involving a journey, a series of encounters with figures rendered in ways consistent with supernatural or divine status in several pre-Columbian traditions, and an arrival at a destination that the final scene marks with an image that has been interpreted, cautiously, as a representation of this canyon. This document may be an account of how these objects came to be here. It may be the story of whoever brought them. Number 2 was the last object found before the one that changed everything, and it is the one that the team's linguist has described as her personal obsession. It was a small ceramic cylinder, about 4 inches tall and 2 inches in diameter, sealed at both ends with fired clay caps, and inside it, rolled tightly and preserved in remarkable condition by the sealed air, was a narrow strip of the same treated hide used for the map in Object 5. The strip was about 18 inches long and covered along its entire length with writing in the same symbol system found on the clay tablet, the wooden sticks, and the slate portrait. But this strip was different from those other inscriptions in a way that was immediately apparent. It was dense. The symbols were smaller and more closely spaced than on any other object in the cave, written with the consistency and speed of someone for whom this notation was as natural as handwriting. This was not someone laboriously recording something in an unfamiliar system. This was someone who wrote in this script fluently. And the strip ends in a way that linguists recognized as significant, with a sequence of symbols that appears 3 times in quick succession, separated each time by a single symbol that appears nowhere else in the strip. The linguist who noticed this described it in her notes as resembling a signature. Someone signed this. Someone put their name on a document they placed in a sealed cave under a river and expected perhaps to return for it, or expected someone else to find it. And now we come to number 1. The object that was found at the very back of the chamber, in the alcove at its deepest point, elevated on a natural shelf of stone at exactly eye level, as if placed there to be found and looked at directly. It was a ceramic vessel, large, about 18 inches tall, with a wide mouth sealed by a fitted stone cap locked in place by a layer of resin that had hardened over centuries into something almost as hard as the stone itself. The conservators took 3 days to open it without causing damage. Inside, packed in layers of dry moss that had desiccated into a fine brown powder, were 42 objects, each individually wrapped in fragments of the same bark paper used for the codex. Each wrapping had symbols on it, in the same writing system, and the team's linguist, working across 2 weeks with the complete corpus of inscribed objects from the cave now available for comparison, arrived at a tentative but significant conclusion. Each label on each wrapped object appeared to be a title or a description. This vessel was a library. Not in the metaphorical sense. A literal library of small objects considered to hold knowledge, wrapped and labeled and stored by someone who organized and cataloged and considered the preservation of information to be worth extraordinary effort. The 42 objects inside the vessel include additional inscribed materials, mineral samples, small carved figurines, what appear to be seed specimens sealed in resin, and 3 items still under analysis, whose nature has not yet been publicly reported. When the lead archaeologist finished documenting the contents, she did not speak for a long time. What she eventually said, according to a colleague who was present, was that she had spent her career studying the pre-Columbian Southwest and had always believed the story was more complicated than the textbooks described. She said this was the proof she had not expected to find. She said someone who lived in this canyon a very long time ago had decided that knowledge was worth more than almost anything else and had built a system to protect it, and had succeeded. The system had worked for centuries. The knowledge was still there. We just didn't know yet what most of it said. Here's the challenge I want to leave you with. The 20 objects in this cave represent materials from Minnesota, Michigan, Utah, New Mexico, West Texas, Baja California, the Pacific Coast, the Gulf of California, and at least 2 regions of Mexico. They represent knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, cartography, textile production, metal casting, and at least 1 written language that no one has yet deciphered. They were assembled, organized, and deliberately sealed in a hidden chamber by someone, or a group of people, who understood that knowledge was fragile and that hiding it carefully was the same as keeping it alive. The next time someone tells you that pre-Columbian North America was a patchwork of isolated, simple communities without writing, without long-distance connection, without the kind of intellectual ambition that builds libraries, ask them about the necklace made from materials gathered across 4,000 miles of a continent. Ask them about the codex that may be the story of a journey to this canyon. Ask them about the library vessel at the back of the cave with 42 labeled items inside it. History is not simple. It has never been simple. It has just been stored in places we weren't looking. Drop a comment right now and tell me which of these 20 objects you think is most significant and why. The conversations in the comments on videos like this one are genuinely extraordinary, and I read every one of them. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this with someone who thinks they know how the story of this continent begins, and I'll see you in the next one.